My name is Matthew Ung, the chairman of the Woodbury County Board. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to our Legislative Roundtable. A couple of housekeeping items. We do have microphones. We're going to move around, tracking the speakers if you would, please. The red light means it's on. We have our department heads up there. They're playing supervisor for a day. They have their own mics as well. And we also have Legislator J.D. Schulten on the phone with us, so he'll be able to speak through these speakers and also hear us as well. And we are recording this for distribution for anyone that can't make it. The difference with this roundtable compared to the one earlier this year, I think, is we have obviously more of a focus on Woodbury County. We have our department heads here. I'm going to call upon them to give some different summaries of legislative issues they have for you. And we also have invited our rural towns as far as the mayors and city council members. So when we do introductions in a bit, if you're representing a town, please let us know what you do and feel free to be involved in the discussion as much as possible with our legislators and contribute any topics at the end if you like as well. So with that, let's start with introductions. Just last time we had the legislators say, you know, what committees they're on, any things they're working on, and obviously if you're from a town, how you represent that city. So Matthew Young, Woodbury County Board.
Dan Bittinger, Woodbury County Board.
Mark Nelson, Woodbury County Board.
Jeremy Taylor, Woodbury County Board.
Ken Carlson, Representative District 13, and it's been too long since we've been down there. I don't remember my committees. I'm serious. I don't remember them all. Veterans Administration, Natural Resources, Technology. What is the fourth one? Agriculture, maybe? Agriculture. Sorry.
Senator Kevin Alons with representing most of Woodbury, all of Monona, part of Cherokee, part of Plymouth. Committees, HHS, Appropriations, Ag, VA, and Technology with the Appropriations Subcommittee for HHS. So probably HHS is definitely the biggest focus for me. It's just the busiest committee.
Bob Henderson, I served as in the House for District 2, which is the northern part of Sioux City out through almost to Mobile, not quite to Mobile. I serve on transportation, public safety, and local government, as well the Education Appropriations Subcommittee.
State Representative Jacob Bossman. I represent House District 14, which is the Morningside area of Sioux City, basically everything south of Gordon Drive down to Sergeant Bluff and Salix. I serve on the Appropriations Committee, the State Government Committee, those are the two big ones, Labor Committee, and then I'm chair of the Transportation, Infrastructure, and Capitals Budget.
Mark Nara, Woodbury County Engineer.
Good evening, Mike Montino. I'm the Woodbury County Emergency Management Coordinator.
Dennis Butler, Finance Budget Director, Woodbury County.
Jeanette Beekman with the City of Pearson. I'm the City Clerk.
April Petzier with the City of Correctionville. I'm the City Clerk.
John Meese, Supervisor, Public County.
Eric Nelson, Farmer Interested Party from Mobile.
Peter Whitman, Sergeant Bluff, interested.
Deb Nathan, Woodbury County landowner.
Michelle Scaff, Deputy Auditor, Clerk to the Board.
Anyone else in the room? JD, you want to introduce yourself? If you can unmute yourself. And
Yep. Thank you, everybody, for allowing me to call in. I feel this is very important to be a part of. And my work took me out of town this weekend. But J.D. Schulten, represent House District 1, which is West 7th to Riverside, Stone Park to around Grandview Park. And I'm on agriculture, natural resources, economic development, technology, and commerce. And so just happy to be here.
all right, I think that completes our introductions. Appreciate everyone for being here. It means a lot to us as a county that you guys would take time, especially before your session when things are going to get real busy real soon. So we'd like to have some direct conversation back and forth with you. We want to try and stay on topic. We did talk about our department heads last time we were together and how they have a wealth of information, so we're going to, display that today. And let's try and keep any, side topics for after the meeting. If anyone really wants to get a hold of a legislator or a supervisor, that'd be the appropriate time after the meeting. We just have a few items to kick off the county discussion, and then after each item, we'll let you see if you have any insight for us, and then we'll turn it over to you as far as what you got planned for next year. So first thing we have is property tax rate discussion. This is pretty generalized. I know a lot of legislative changes have already taken place. I would just kick this off by saying, we respect what you're trying to do as far as limit the expansion of local government, especially when new spending comes on, and keep track with other metrics of inflation. In our case, we are going to have a large influx of revenue from the It's No Secret Woodbury County Law Enforcement Center. Interestingly, a lot of that, or I should say all of that, virtually all of that revenue is going directly to pay down the bond. So this is a self-regulating example of county government stepping into new revenue with a plan and finding a way to serve its taxpayers without raising the rates. And by lowering the rates as much as we have in Woodbury County over the years, in some ways we feel proud of that. In some ways we also probably feel we did too well, because then we had a cap set for us, and it was based upon where we were at the moment. And I understand you can't necessarily know exactly what year to start this in, but we're also interested in what future changes may be coming in that legislative realm. So, Dennis, I'm not sure if there's really a lot for you to discuss, but if there's anything you think we should bring up on this topic as far as the different tax funds, maybe give you a few minutes.
Okay. General basic and rural basic are two funds that are really critical because they are restricted. The way the law's set up, we already know what our tax base increase is going to be. And also, with the new valuation, it will actually reduce our tax rate in our general basic fund about 8 cents per thousand, and rural basic about 4 cents per thousand to 5 cents. So for the rural people combined.
Can you speak in your mic closer there, Dennis?
Okay.
I think it's on, but.
Okay. The combination too for the rural people, it's going to go down by 11 to 12 cents on general basic, rural basic. General supplemental is unlimited. That was not touched. And also debt service is unlimited. That was not touched for obvious reasons. In going through this, there's two items I'd like to discuss shortly. One is with the new valuation, all it does is reduce our tax rates. It doesn't generate more tax revenue. Example is where you got an interchange that's going to be already started building south of town here, $28 million interchange in calendar year 26. If we draw $500 million or $1 billion plant, there's going to be costs to the county that we're going to have to do roads, law enforcement, road maintenance, maybe construction of roads. We have no ability to tax for that to help us because all the new valuations off that new tax or that new business, we can't touch. All it'll do is lower our rates. So how do we fund this when we're restricted to what we can levy? The second thing is Matthew mentioned, yes, we were going to do $3.5 million worth of federal prisoner care to reduce our tax rate in the debt service. But because we've been, frugal, conservative, we've held the tax rate, we now are going to have to shift that over to our general basic fund because we use $4.5 million worth of other revenues, reserves, cash reserves, sale of a farm, things like that, gaming revenue. So how do we make this up now that we're frozen? We got $703,000 worth of new revenue in the general basic, and we got $4.5 million to make up. Thank goodness we have the opportunity to have a new jail open by July 1st. They'll generate a large sum of money that's going to help us out tremendously. But they'll raise our debt service rate while we're lowering our general basic rate, and there's nothing we can do about it. If we don't use that money, 3.5 in our general basic, we're facing severe problems because we have no way to generate any more money except the $704,000 based on House File 718. So those two things there, they're pretty critical to us: the funding of our general basic fund and the additional expenses incurred by big business coming in. That's why we're building a new interchange, because we do plan on attracting businesses. And they are going to be, 100,000 or 100 million, 200 million. They're going to be $500 million to $1 billion businesses is what we want to attract. But we have to have ability to maintain everything around it, law enforcement, roads, all that kind of things. So we need some help and look at this House File 718. I know it's through fiscal year 29, I believe, for the next 5 years. So a lot can happen next 5 years. So hopefully you'll kind of think about that new valuation where we could use it.
Thanks, Dennis. I don't think any of this is necessarily the end of the world. It's just, we're trying our best to match the types of funds to the types of expenses. So we're talking about an influx, not necessarily ongoing guaranteed revenue, but we're trying to match that appropriately. And obviously, if this comes into general basic where we're capped, we have to be cognizant of what that funds so that the money doesn't, we don't assume that property tax dollars are as stable as other sorts of dollars. Supervisors, anything to add? Mr. Taylor?
Well, I appreciate each of you being here and the time that you spend away from your families and the community. I think to what Chairman Ung alluded to, the limitations in some respects feel like a kind of a one-size-fits-all. So the last 9 years, you've had a pretty conservative board, majority Republicans, on this board, and we've reduced duplication, we've combined positions, we sold a county farm, we've used reserves, we've done everything that we can to keep the levy as low as we can. And then to your point, now you have a 3% allowable growth. It feels a little bit like you have a 400-pound man and you have a 200-pound man and they're being put on the same diet. So if you have somebody like Johnson County with a lot of largesse, and then you say, well, you can grow by 3%, we're given the same diet plan, so to speak, as all the other counties. So I would just echo, we have a $4.5 million shortfall right now. I don't know how we're going to make that up because we relied on reserves and we allowed the sale of the county farm to meet some ongoing expenses. So we're going to have to find that money somewhere. So I would just echo what Dennis said. If we could have the new growth exempt from that, I'll give you one example. When we had CF Industries do a $2.1 billion expansion, we had to put law enforcement down there. It was very hard on the roads. So there's an additional expense that's incurred whenever you have new growth. But it seems like with this, any sort of new growth, you're not allowed to use it. You've got to commensurately lower the levy rate. And so you're not actually using some of that new growth for the expenses that are incurred. So if there's one legislative fix, I would say the exemption on new growth would be helpful. Thank you.
Supervisor Meese, did you want to add anything? Any impacts to our rural communities or questions for legislators?
Yeah, they've heard from me plenty last year, but smaller scale, but the same situation where, that's our basic income is tax revenue, and you've limited what ratcheted down over the next 5 years, what we're able to levy. So it puts us in a pickle.
I think we heard, new valuation is a question, and then also what future plans do you think are coming down for tax rate issues? So I'll turn it over to you gentlemen. Any responses or insight?
I guess I can start off real quick. I would say in regards to property taxes, I don't think that there's any plans to tackle anything this year except to monitor this. What we discussed at caucus is we want to see exactly how this plays out. We do want to be aware and try to adapt very quickly, when we run into things that are not working the way that they expected it to. So I would say my guess over the next couple of years is that we'll simply try to monitor and fix any things that are maybe happening ways that we didn't intend. But I don't see that there'd be any huge proposals over the next couple of years, at least dealing with property taxes. Although you get into other types of taxes, we can have that conversation later.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we have to, I know I've met with Mark and understand some of the difficulties that are at least proposed and thought of. But we need to see if that, how that's actually going to affect everything, so.
So I had a conversation with, we caucused yesterday, and I talked to Dan Dawson some, who obviously was a big author part of this, working with the LSA person. And they really expressed an openness to having a dialogue, right? So we can hopefully work through the limitations that people run into and see how, like you said, how it plays out and find a way to, as you recognize the intent, we can hopefully get that executed while not just handicapping counties and cities that are in a tough spot or have already been making good choices. So that's what I want to see happen as well. Can you get anything, Dan? Or?
I have a question. Suppose 718 would not have passed. How many of these problems would you still be facing? I mean, you've taken money from here and there and sold a farm, so forth and so on. How many of those things would you still have had to have done if 718 had not passed? That's question number one. I'll have a second one if I can get an answer, if anybody has an answer.
I do.
Yep.
What, if House File 718 hadn't passed, we'd be able to.
Had not passed.
Had not passed, correct. We'd still be able to use then the new valuations, and usually we generate $1 to $1.5 million off of new valuations. That's new construction, new valuations on properties, and also we wouldn't be limited on our general basic fund. Now we're limited to 3.89, which is our levy. That's going to drop every year because we can't use the new values. The new value is going to keep dropping our rate down. So it wouldn't put us in the essential bind we're in because we could levy the taxes, and that's probably going against the thoughts of our gentleman here, is we're going to be raising the tax rates if we didn't have House File 718 to fund county government. Hopefully, we don't have a reduction in services. We never have had it in the 50 years I've been here, and I don't think the board plans on reducing services. We'll figure a way through it no matter what. But that's what probably would happen. Rates probably could have gone up a little more. The board tries to be very conservative. They have been for 9 years. But we're at a point now we're going to be exhausting some of our reserves. We can't keep depending on reserves or a Band-Aid. Even on state level, if you use reserves, what's your level when that runs out? What do you do? So we have long-term thinking about this. What do we do? But that's the effect it would have House File 718 had not passed. Rates could have gone up possibly, but we're in unique circumstances in the state because we've got a new jail. It's going to generate a lot of money. And that's going to save us, whether pass or didn't pass.
So my second question then is, I like the 400-pound, 200-pound analogy that was shared. That has been the big struggle for me down there in the Capitol, is it seems like complaints are made, and it came not from the Sioux cities, but it came from the Iowa cities and the big ones, from the people who say they won't stop spending our money and they won't stop raising our taxes. They just keep doing it, doing it, doing it. My first response is, vote them out of office. But my second response to that is, with the 400-pound and 200-pound man, I have not figured out, and if you can share how to do that, how do we deal with those two extremes? Do we put a list up there and say, okay, Sioux City, you get to do this. Des Moines, you don't get to do it. I mean, I'm open for any kind of suggestions or recommendations on dealing with that issue, as I see it.
Could I respond again?
No.
I've been told no before. I do think that that's a smarter, if you have a prescriptive diet plan for each of our 200-pounder or 400, maybe to look at a per capita basis, what are people being taxed per capita or per person in each respective county? So that, you start to really hone in with some granularity on this particular citizen, per citizen, this is what they're being taxed versus this one. And if there's a formula, if you're in this tier, I'm not sure if I can give you the specific legislative fix, but it would seem like the one-size-fits-all approach right now is what really hinders us versus somebody who really needs that sort of plan and limitation and are your top 5, 6, 7 county complainers. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I think it needs to be more targeted towards those whose spending is out of control versus you've got really good, maybe you have Plymouth County that's very conservative and thoughtful, and all of a sudden you've put them on this growth plan the same as, Johnson or Polk County, and they're two different remedies for two different peoples.
I guess I could offer up a pretty easy legislative fix, and that would be to repeal it. I guess I don't understand. Yes, absolutely. I don't understand this crusade to take away local government. I thought we were conservatives. We've got 5 Republicans here on the board. We've got a Republican House and a Republican Senate. I think the cornerstone of conservatism is small local government. It doesn't get much smaller and local than this. And yet what we've done is taken away small local control and made medium-sized government, which is at the state level, bigger. I don't think Chuck Grassley or Joni Ernst should have any business in setting the budget for California. I don't think that that's something that the federal government should do. The states should set their own budgets. The counties should set their own budget. If Johnson County or Lynn County have problems with spending, vote some people out of office. That's the fix. We're punishing the counties that do it right in an effort to try to win in a place where, to be honest, they're choosing their lifestyle. I think I brought up last time that voters in Woodbury County approved a jail. Voters in Monona County voted theirs down twice. That's their choice, but that's the difference between the two counties. The Monona voters didn't think they needed it. The Woodbury County voters thought that they did. And that's totally fine. At the end of the day, that is totally fine. Do I want to live in California? Absolutely not. But do I want to control do I think I need to control what they spend or do? That's their business. And I just feel like this whole thing, it just takes away all of the local options that we had. And so my question to you as Republicans, because I've had many Republicans from the county and the like come up to me and say, this is big government. So how do you defend the actions of this tax bill when you did take away small local control and transferred it to a much higher power? How do you answer a fellow conservative Republican when they ask that question?
Well, I think first off, we have parameters on almost everything we do in the state. That yes, you have the authority to do this, the state, the school boards, the county supervisors. But there's a lot of things in government where we put the parameters in which you operate. And I think that this is an example of that. We're not taking local control away. We're just saying it has to be within this area. And I think it's because we're trying to look out for everyone in the state. You said if people don't like it, vote people out. Well, tell that to a Republican who lives in Johnson County. Good luck with that. A farmer, a landowner in rural Johnson County that sees their property taxes going up 20, 30, 40%, they can't just move. So I think this is a tough issue because, like Jeremy said, you are getting some people that are already lean put on this diet. What we're doing is because of the bad actors elsewhere in the state, and the elections were not a viable recourse, and there was something that had to be done. And that was the number one thing that we were hearing across the state. Where property taxes were too high, they were out of control. We put a soft cap in place. You had a lot of these local governments that just blew through that. We required, extra hearings so the public was more aware. We required a super majority vote to raise taxes, and a lot of places just blew through that. So it wasn't having an impact. And it's unfortunate. What we're trying to do here is limit any sort of negative impacts to the areas that were doing it correctly beforehand. But this law wasn't put in place because you guys were doing anything wrong. There was, places elsewhere in the state where it was just out of control to the point where something had to be done.
But the impacts need to be mitigated by the local communities, and it's not a one-size-fits-all, and at some point you have to accept responsibility. And really what this did is it took away opportunity for Woodbury County because people in Johnson County can move. They can sell their house, they can sell their farm, and they can move to places like Woodbury County where we value conservatism and low taxes and responsible government. And so now we're trying to level this playing field that we have, that in my opinion, the state has no business doing. Again, the voters have an avenue to do it. Yes, the demographics change. Look at California. Look at all the Republicans leaving California, but then they go to places like Idaho and look at the growth that Idaho has. So let's not focus on the story that California is this wasteland. Let's focus on the story that Idaho is a boomtown. And I'm just afraid that we're just trying to level this playing field. We're trying to dumb everything down. Let local governments make the decisions. Let the voters make decisions, and not try to think that you know better. Because isn't that exactly why we don't like large government, is that they think they know better? I think the voters in Johnson County know better than what the folks in the State House think Johnson County voters need. And so this thing needs to be repealed, and I would always urge more local control.
Matthew, if I could, just to give Jeremy's 400, 200-pound man diet a real number, the allowable rural basic levy is $3.95. And Dennis can correct me, ours is $2.49. So we're already levying almost $1.50 less than is allowed by state code. And yet we're seeing that same limitation and reduction on our ability to grow that a county that's levying the full boat against its real property is. So maybe that's where you need to make that massage a little bit, but thank you.
I think we're fairly clear on our stances here. If I could cap this off, pun intended, I would just say to your original point, Ken, is, this, as far as the differences, I think this legislation, well-intended as it is, makes it maybe a little harder to notice those differences. And those differences is what we really rely on to make our arguments about what works and what doesn't, and to point to certain counties that don't do it right and certain counties that do. So I just encourage you to, see how the feedback is this year, and if there's common themes you're getting from counties that have reduced rates versus ones that haven't, then you kind of know where things are headed. All right, let's move on. Secondary roads budgeting is the next one. Mark Nera up there has several decades of experience doing secondary roads things all over the state. And he has prepared some light reading for you guys to take home and read your kids while you tuck them in to bed at night. So I'll ask you to, kick it off, Mark, with maybe 10 minutes and go from there. Be merciful with us. I know you've really given a lot of food for thought to the legislators, and we really appreciate you being such an advocate for our county. But, as one of the larger counties' road systems, he does speak for a lot of the dynamic in the state. So, Mark Nera.
And I guess I'm going to pick on House File 718, so I'm going to pound on it once again because Jacob had mentioned that there's that you need to monitor, see how things are going with it, but there's already one problem. When 718 passed, there was an unintended consequence that the legislature wasn't aware of. There's two provisions in the Code of Iowa that require a county levy 75% of their minimum available local effort through property taxes. There's 11 counties that are currently at that 75% level. So it's not just Woodbury County that is beginning to face this crisis. The two sections of the code that I'm referring to are 309.10. If you fail to meet that 75% minimum local effort, you are not able to use your farm to market money. For Woodbury County, that's $1.8 million a year that we would be restricted in its use. The treasurer of the state is also instructed if we fail to meet our minimum local effort in a fiscal year, in the subsequent fiscal year, we lose dollar for dollar in our road use tax fund distributions. The third sheet in the handout shows where Woodbury County is going to end up, and I've confirmed this with the model from the Department of Management. So these are the numbers where we're at. I also added in our fiscal year 2025. 2019 through 2024 highlight what our actual growth has been in property tax valuations through those years. It shows you how we go through we've got the taxable valuation in the rural area on that chart. To determine that minimum local effort, you multiply that rural basic times $3.03, dividing it by 1,000 to come up with what the potential rural valuation would raise. You take the general basic valuation, multiply it times 16 7/8 cents. And what that does is you come over to what the potential property tax revenue would be. You can see in fiscal year 2025, and this isn't certified valuations yet, but this is the number Dennis gave me for calculating my budget. At maximum road levies, we would raise $5,596,000. Our board has historically held us right near that 75%. Last year, they did give us some additional because we were looking at 8% growth in a lot of our expenses. We had growth of over 4% in our wages. Fuel had almost gone up by 70%. And the board did kick some extra money to us, which is actually saving us this year as we go through the calculations. And I know Senator Alon's and Representative Henderson have seen this calculation before, and the severity started to hit this year. But once we had actual numbers, because of the effects of last year's extra appropriation the board gave, this year my head is still above water, and we're going to make that minimum levy, assuming I can keep the same levy amount as I had last year. But you can see where I get down to that minimum local effort of roughly $4.2 million. Woodbury County then further dedicates its local option sales tax revenues to property tax reduction. And the amount that we're anticipating for 2025 is about $2,525,000. So we're looking at levying a minimum of $1,672,000. If we're able to keep the same levy rate, applying the levy rate from House File 718, we drop from $1.16 roughly to $1.14. But that still allows me to get enough to make that minimum 75%. You can see in future years, though, assuming just 3% growth, which is well behind what the county has seen historically over the prior 6 years, you can see that we start to fall behind, and within the next 10 years, we're looking at a shortfall of $6,642,000 in property tax revenue or local effort that's not achieved. That levy, as you can see, continues to decline by that 2% limitation. And that's assuming the board proportions it over all the departments that come from the rural basic. So I'm assuming that emergency services, conservation, and all the rest of them, and Woodbury County secondary roads see that same 2% reduction applied to our levy. So if you look at that 6.6 million, you can see that we would be 6.6 million short in road use tax funds. That brings us up to 13 million in 10 years. We're also unable to access our farm to market funding. Our farm to market funding is the biggest end of our construction efforts. That's the money that we use to match the federal aid that comes down to the county as well. We just did the Port Neal Road project this year. We got $2.125 million in federal aid. We matched that with $1.1 million in farm to market money to allow us to do that very important project, which serves a number of industries over there. If we don't make the minimum effort, as you can see under 309.10, we wouldn't have that funding to utilize. We're only allowed to carry a 3-year balance in our farm to market. Currently, we're borrowed ahead by a little over 2 years. So in 2 years, we'd be at 0. 3 years after that, we would be at our maximum, and then they would start deducting 1 year at a time as we move forward, still unable to make up our minimum local effort. So we'd lose $1.8 million a year for roughly the last 7 years of this program that you're looking at out to fiscal year 2036. We need a legislative fix now. Scott County's in the same boat. Appanoose County is in a similar boat. One county is talking about layoffs of county staff and dropping their construction program. Somebody else that's at that 75%. We had discussion on this at our county engineers annual meeting that I just left to get here today. The way I see it, there's 3 possible fixes, and those are on page 2. One would be eliminate the minimum local effort. I think that would be bad policy. This was put in place in the 1920s. That's when the state first started collecting a fuel tax. And what they found was that counties thought, well, shoot, state money will take care of our roads. We don't need to levy property taxes. And I think the legislature was wise to make sure counties had skin in the game. I'd hate to see that go away. Number two is, for the counties levying less than 100% of their allowable effort, apply the HF 17 or 718 restrictions on growth only after we've satisfied that 75% to other revenues within that department. So allow the county to calculate what they need to maintain their secondary road fund at that minimum level. And then in those other funds, apply that restriction on growth. The third option would be to index the local effort, minimum effort, at the same rate that you're restricting all the revenues. So initially it would be 75%, and then it would probably ratchet back by 2% per year. The way I've calculated this out, even counties that are levying 100%, the full $3.03 and 16 7/8%, given enough years under the provision of this, will eventually hit the point where they will be at that 75% and start to lose. We can't afford to lose that access to that farm to market fund, nor can we afford to lose our road use tax funds that come directly to fund our budget. Our system's too large and we need that work. And Mark's option is the third, repeal the legislation. But I realize what your goal was, but this was a severe unintended consequence of that legislation. And we absolutely can't wait for this to be solved in 3 or 4 years down the line, because next year it begins to take effect upon the county. I mean, $208 just assumes that we're at roughly 3% growth. If we have 5% growth like we did this year, that would probably be up to $10,000, $12,000. It ratchets up because it's the inverse of that percentage that you get rolled back. But I hope that you can take this back. I've contacted Senator Dawson. I haven't shared with him the updated model with our actual fiscal year 2025 revenues. We just turned in our budget last week. But this does have ramifications. It's not just Woodbury County. There are several that are feeling the pinch right now. Thank you.
Excellent, Mark. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if the supervisors really have anything to add to this unless we have a clarifying question for Mark before we get your reactions. Any clarifying questions on what he said?
Mark, what are the direct results of those shortfalls? If what are Woodbury County residents going to be looking at if the secondary road has these types of shortfalls where we're losing dollar per dollar, where we can't get federal aid grants? What's going to be cut? What won't be accessible? And I know you might be spitballing here, but just try to paint us a picture.
Yeah. Our federal aid bridge funds will be intact, at least for the current federal highway bill, because our federal aid bridge money is at 100% funding for farm to market and local bridges. We get about $1.6 million a year, so that portion won't be affected. We have a project on Old Highway 75 to put a concrete overlay on it, and it will be hit by this if we fail to make our local effort in fiscal year 2026. We would be unable to use our farm to market money. That's a 50-50 federal aid, 50-50, or 50% federal aid, 50% farm to market. That would be our first federal aid project hit by it. In fiscal year 26, we're going through the town of Anthon with D38 resurfacing. If we can't use our farm to market money, that project is grounded. Looking at what we'd lose locally, $106,000. Initially, we would probably reduce things like new equipment, but that becomes one of those pay me now, pay me later arguments. We're in the middle of our gravel road improvement program. This is a project that the board funded using tax increment financing because of the growth in valuation we have because of the CF Industries project. The board was able to dedicate $10 million to the county road department to improve 750 miles of gravel roads. We've hauled 900 tons per mile already to 300 miles of gravel roads out there, and it's already making a difference in the quality of those roads. We brought on 4 additional staff members and some additional equipment to help us accomplish that task. We'd be struggling to keep the staff level once we get out there about 4 years, and that'll be in the year we're completing the project roughly. You know, I think the engineer is gonna have to pick and choose where we're at with with what we cut, but our biggest items are payroll, the gravel we buy for maintenance, equipment, fuel, construction. Those are our 5 big items, and they would be the most affected by the shortfalls that we would be looking at.
Mark, and can you just briefly speak very quickly to the necessity of the $10 million through tax increment financing? What were county residents speaking to that was such a necessity, just so it doesn't seem like,
right,
here are these guys that are just going bananas on, you know, unnecessary expenses. What's the whole point of the $10 million, given gravel prices and or 750 miles that you're taking care of?
In 2019, we had a severe thaw. Our roads turned to mush. Most of our roads by 2019 had less than 1.5 to 2 inches of gravel on them. Going back in our records and you look at 1985 when the county stopped graveling every mile every year, we had 6 to 8 inches of gravel on each mile of road. So this $10 million segregated to our higher level gravel road system. We have 960 miles of gravel. We're putting up to 2,000 tons per mile on roughly 750 miles of that system. That's going to bring us back to where we have 5 to 7 inches of base on all of our roads again, which will give the county the quality roads that our ag producers need out there. Even the 900 we got on the roads today is making a difference in those areas. This spring, I think we had the best road performance in some of the areas during the thaw that we've seen in a number of years. And you could tell the difference between the roads that had 900 tons to the mile added to the roads that had 600 tons to the mile added and the roads that had not seen any of the gravel yet. So we're in a rare position with the economic development we had with the CF project that the board was able to find and levy that amount of money to make a real improvement in our gravel road system.
Thank you for that. And I just wanted to bring up, I know not everybody's a big fan of TIF, but we were trying to do that so that we weren't going to property taxpayers, you know, so that we're borrowing against future revenue in the spirit of what you all were trying to do on limiting property tax growth.
So I guess the question is, what sort of discussions were had or could be had on this local effort dynamic that Mark is speaking about?
Just some questions to throw out there. What are your thoughts on triple axle trucks running on all your gravel roads? Or what are your thoughts on the governor allowing 96,000 pound loads running on your gravel roads? Or what are your thoughts on licensing and or taxing this huge farm equipment that is running on your gravel roads?
The ISAC has a position right now requesting the opportunity for additional revenue for counties. We proposed legislation on a per bushel of grain or per head of pork or cattle, some type of a fee that would be applied to secondary roads to improve those. I've never been thrilled by the governor's annual proclamation. I think it's unnecessary and it's really compounding the problem. Without going into a lot of detail, the tire pressures that are allowed on semis today, up around 110 PSI, and the reduction in contact area that creates under each of those tires is doing severe damage, not only to our gravels, but to our pavements. One of the things that, if I could make legislation and we're the king of Iowa, I'd say we require all farm loads to have the variable tire pressures that they use up in forest country. There's some U.S. forestry research that shows that if you have variable tire pressure systems and can lower those tire pressures down around 50 to 60 PSI, it makes a difference on those unpaved roadways. And then they pump it up to their 110 PSI when they hit the pavements. It extends the life of those granular surfaced roads, but that isn't technology that's applied in Iowa. You only really see that in out west and in the forest country, but there's a lot of research that shows how well that works. I'm not a fan of the governor's annual proclamation. The triple axles are actually more forgiving than what tandem axles are. A 90,000-pound tandem axle load that's allowed under the new all systems permit is much more damaging to our roads than a legally loaded 96,000-pound truck. I would rather see those on the roads any day compared to allowing the overloads and having the governor's annual proclamation. That hurt us in January and February. I had never seen in 40 years of county engineering, I had never seen that emergency proclamation extended past December 31st. And this year we got hit by a minor thaw in January and February, and it tore a lot of our roads apart.
How much money do you anticipate getting from the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act that our wonderful federal Congress and President have dealt to us? Are you going to see any funds from that to help?
We have seen money from that. Our appropriation to our MPO is up this year. I'm trying to remember if that was 800,000 that comes to the 5 counties in our RPA, and then there's money that also came to the MPO. In regard to bridge funds is where we saw the biggest impact with the IIJA. We went from roughly $900,000 a year in federal bridge funds to about $1.6 million a year. So we did see a substantial increase in that. Woodbury County has either the first or the second highest number of structurally deficient and functionally obsolete bridges in the state. We also have the second most number of bridges in the state, so it's not surprising that we have such a large population of the ones that are deficient.
Thank you.
I wish I could give a clear answer like, yeah, we could do X, Y, or Z. I did, like I said, I had a conversation with the people that were working on this on the Senate side, and I think just taking this data, going over the details with them, and maybe with Mark, I don't know, I think would be good, just to get them to confirm that, yep, these are reasonable expected projections, and then I guess try to drive that conversation this coming session.
Thank you. JD on the phone, you have anything?
No, I just, I know Representative Carlson was probably being sarcastic there, but I'm grateful that the infrastructure, we're getting some federal infrastructure money.
So as a Woodbury County citizen that lives 2 miles from a paved road, that means I've got 2 miles of gravel east or west of me in order to hit a pavement. I remember the thaw of 2019. The weather was awful that year, and it really set us up for disaster. And as a farmer who has grain and livestock that we have to be able to market and haul to town whenever those entities need to be delivered, especially on a time-sensitive thing like livestock, when you talk cattle or hogs, when they're sold and they have to be delivered, that's it. That's when they have to go. It doesn't matter if it's a snowstorm or if it's muddy or if it's 100 degrees, they have to go. And the roads have to be able to take that. And it's unfortunate. There's certain times of the year that we'd love to park the trucks, but we can't work around the weather when we're in the business of agriculture. And I think all of you know that agriculture is king in Iowa. And so when you look at this, it really handcuffs what is really the backbone of our whole state, which is the rural road infrastructure that make our farms work. And already you can go to a lot of these communities and ask about and I know the last 2 winters we've had almost no snow, so the road conditions haven't been a problem in the spring. But years past, you had ambulances and fire saying, we may not get to your house. Legitimately. You had FedEx, UPS saying, we can't get to your house. Trash service, we can't get to your house. School buses, that still is very common for school buses to stop and not be able to pick up kids. This is a massive disruption, and it in a way creates second-class citizens. You know, folks in town have all these amenities that run around the clock year-round, and so what a way to chase people out of Iowa to say, well, if you live out in the country, good luck. You know, if you need anything 3 or 4 months out of the year, it's probably not going to happen. And so there has to be a fix on this immediately. We can't afford to go backwards, and there's a lot of other counties that are barely treading water enough. I mean, we have to fight for what's right, and our rural roads are just so important to so many citizens in this whole state, not only Woodbury County. So I would implore you to please get after this. So, thank you.
Appreciate it.
It's good conversation going on. I'm just listening to this.
All right, well, you guys know how to get a hold of Mark. If you have any questions. Appreciate that, Mark. Thank you. Next thing we have is emergency management theme. My understanding of the current dynamic and legislation is that there's is or could be a choice between direct taxation or going through the budgeting process. We have Mike Montino here, Director of Emergency Management. We also have Scott Mitchell here, our Director of Emergency Services. And we're a little bit different around the state because we have these two entities. And so I'll turn it over to Mr. Montino and you know, just be thinking in the back of your mind as we think about management and services, what future legislation should there be or could there be to address where the state wants to go with which entities should be funding certain things. Are you wanting EMA to take over more of a role? Are you wanting to look to counties for certain things? And so I'll turn it over.
Good evening. My name is Mike Montino. I'm the Emergency Management Coordinator for Woodbury County. I'm a fairly new addition to the county here. Formerly, I'm from the city of Chicago. I did emergency management out there and in the suburbs for about 10 years. I've been here for about a year and a half now. Ever since I came here to Woodbury County, it has been my belief that it is my duty to provide the highest level of emergency management competency and do it in a fiscally responsible manner. When someone in my family dials 911, I expect the best. When they call for help in a disaster, I expect the best. And I'd like to assume that our citizens here in Woodbury County and in the surrounding area would also expect nothing less. As a result of that, it is my responsibility to pursue every option, every avenue for providing that level of competency. And as a result of that, I would like to introduce to you Senate File 570. This is something that was introduced by the Iowa Emergency Management Association, and this is a very recent introduction. It was also introduced in a different form last year, so there have been some modifications to it. And this is a proposed strike amendment in collaboration with the Iowa County Board of Supervisors Association. So just a little bit of background. In the state of Iowa, emergency management is actually not a true county department. It actually functions under a commission, which is comprised of a representative from the Board of Supervisors, which in our case is Mr. Taylor. It includes the sheriff and also the mayor from every municipality within the county. This does a couple of things. First of all, it provides some wonderful oversight for me to provide accountability to the citizens of Woodbury County. The second thing that it does, and this is for me, is it allows me a great collaboration effort with our jurisdiction's elected officials. So as of right now, emergency management is funded by the general supplemental levy. Okay, what this Senate file does is solidifies, and this is altering 29C, which is the legislation that guides emergency management in Iowa. What this does is solidifies the ability for the Emergency Management Commission to levy its own tax. And this would be a property tax at no more than $1 per $1,000 of assessed value of taxable property. And this can be used to fund general expenses for emergency management, certain special projects. However, there are some omissions to that, and that includes countywide hazardous materials teams, a community emergency response team, search, rescue, and recovery teams, and incident management support teams. And as Matthew stated, we are a very unique county in Iowa, in that we have both emergency management and emergency services. So this is just a tool in the toolbox. As of right now, things are going well the way we have it. As I continue to grow our programs, it is, in my opinion, better for us to pursue grants and other at-will contributions. When I first started here, it was actually my goal to pay for myself in the first year in grants and other contributions. Sadly, I fell 5,000 short. I will try again next year. But we've also looked at volunteerism to continue to pursue capabilities and programs. We have a brand new team since May of 2023 of approximately 20 very well-trained volunteers that have helped us do education, response, preparedness activities. So that is my first step in response. However, again, for our policymakers, this provides a tool in the toolbox should we need it. Any questions?
I don't know if this is exactly what you're speaking to, but one question on this handout. It says that it's not a new tax, rather it just simply shifts an existing tax to the correct authority and provides transparency for Iowans. I know that the criticism is going to be that there's a new tax. A lot of people are just opposed to anything that they perceive as increasing property taxes, especially when we went through everything we did with House File 718, trying to achieve that goal. So if this is shifting from one tax to another, is there a guarantee in the legislation that will that levy go away? Is there a requirement that whatever was being used under this new tax cannot be collected on that? I guess if this really is just a shift, how do we sell that is actually going to happen?
From current understanding, it is essentially a choice of the county, right? Which avenue they wish to pursue. There are quite a few counties in other parts of Iowa that are not Woodbury that are having issues funding their emergency management programs. And this allows the cities and the commission to be able to get some additional funding to provide those programs. But again, over here, I think we're okay doing what we're currently doing right now unless otherwise noted by our elected officials. Does that help answer your question?
It does for the most part. I think, just politically trying to navigate as you go through this, I just think that there's going to be a lot of questions about how exactly this is going to work. And I don't know, maybe you don't know the answer, but is this something where they could levy a tax under the new proposal? Could they still levy the amount under the old one? Is there, I could just see where this is an unknown, people don't know exactly how this would work, but I can see how there'd be concern that this is going to be an increase in tax collection, an increase in property taxes. So I think as we get through the process, the Iowa Emergency Management Association, the people advocating for this need to be able to kind of answer those questions or kind of calm some of those concerns. And I'm just learning about this for the first time. I just know that's the first thing that's going to come up and people are going to be really hesitant if it's perceived as increasing taxes. Yeah.
Absolutely, and based on my current interpretation and some of the discussions that have been had, it's an either or right now. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a very early discussion and a very early introduction to this, so I'm sure there's going to be further discussion. I have another meeting on January 5th with the Iowa Emergency Management Association, and hopefully we'll have some of those questions answered at that time.
Mike, what sort of services do you think your department could or should fund, if anything, that it doesn't right now?
So with that being said, I think there's some options with this particular levy that would allow us to fund some of the items that are currently being maintained by emergency services at this time. And I don't want to speak for Director Mitchell, but he has certain capabilities such as sandbag trailers and communications equipment. For example, the sheriff's office has a mobile command post, which again provides emergency management function. So this can provide an opportunity to provide funding for some of those additional assets.
Any other input from supervisors or communities? Mostly food for thought then. Any specific legislative plans on emergency-related services that you know of?
This bill, you said it was introduced last year. Do you know whose name is on it or what commission it was in?
Yes, Senator Clemish proposed the bill.
That's what I thought.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Montino. Next topic we have is somewhat predictable. Hazardous pipelines. Had a major development in our case with one of them. The other one is still trucking along. And so we're kind of back where we were earlier this year. At this point, you're about to go into session, and we just really want to know the brass tacks of where things stand. Well, it'd be nice to know where you are personally, but also what avenues or what you can recommend our citizens do, if there's anything they can do, and what you can do or what you're being asked to do. So there's a lot of routes you can go with this question, but really, we're just interested in if we can tell our constituents there's anything to say about these pipelines.
Well, as the single senator here, unfortunately, the Senate refused, the leadership didn't take the topic up, right? And so it got kicked down the road. What I'm hearing is I think we're in a similar situation. The process is playing out, and I don't know what leverage I have, unfortunately, to change that. Personally, I really would like to see more clarification on eminent domain or restrictions on its use, especially for this situation where it's a for-private thing. It doesn't seem to meet what should be the standards for eminent domain. But
do you think there could be a smaller increase to the requirement for voluntary participation before eminent domain? I know there is a proposal for a certain percentage last year. Was there an issue with it being increased at all, or could something else perhaps pass?
Well, I've heard that I think that hopefully there'll be another bill. I don't have a bill myself, but somebody in the Senate I think is going to bring a bill that was started on last year. Unfortunately, I don't know if it'll be effective or not for the existing projects that are already started, or at least in proceeding. So unfortunately, in the Senate side anyway, that's about all I can offer.
Is there an organization for the citizens to support that might be giving you legislation to hopefully restrict this more? Is there an organization like that?
I'll respond to that this way. Number one, JD, I was serious about the money coming from the federal government. I just don't like the debt we're taking on because of it. So maybe I was a little sarcastic, but I wasn't trying to be. The second thing is I voted no on the House bill with regards to the pipelines. And my major objection to it was only 90%. It has got to be 100%, or I'm not ever going to be in favor of it. So that's number one. Number two, there is a group of Republicans, I think there are, 17 or 18 of us, representatives, who have formed a loose-knit organization, I guess you would call it, and we have been advocating for the IUB to bring all of this to an end. So I would suggest, if you want to contact somebody, Representative Helena Hayes, who is Mahaska County. She is one who's kind of the unelected head of this organization, shall we say, and she knows a lot about it. So there are representatives there who are fighting to bring this to an end, and I will continue to be one of those. The last thing that I think that is being missed, big time, is that there are alternatives to burying carbon dioxide in the ground. A couple of them are some ready-made plants. Maybe you're aware of them. Sioux County is looking into this, I believe. But there are companies out there who have got ready-to-put-up facilities at each and every ethanol plant or any plant that produces carbon dioxide, and it immediately converts it to e-methane. E-methanol. Sorry, I finally got to it. And you might think, well, what's the big deal about e-methanol? Well, I'm sure you've seen on the not passenger trains, they don't have any of those, do they? The commercial trains. And it says Maersk on the side of some of those trailers you see on there. That is a huge worldwide shipping company, and they're converting their diesel engines on their ships to, guess what? E-methanol. Somebody's got to provide that fuel to them. And I have no idea why the state of Iowa isn't on board and wanting to be a part of that rather than shipping the CO2, putting it in the ground, where this way we can make some money off of it. And they're ready to go. So I'm big on looking at other alternatives with regards to what CO2 should or should not be doing. But burying it in the ground makes no sense to me at all. And so that's going to always be my position. I'm sure some of you know Doyle Turner. Does that name ring a bell to anybody? Never heard of him. Oh, is he back there? Oh, yeah. We have only talked on the phone and by emails. I'm glad you're here so I can finally meet you face to face. But he knows a lot about this stuff. And so I'm glad that he's here. And he is nodding his head up and down, so I must have said something right. So those would be my comments about the pipelines. I would just say, keep up the fight, keep calling us, because there are a bunch of us who are trying to do the best we can.
Mr. Taylor, do you have something?
Thank you very much for that. And I'm very appreciative of the House and the property rights that you know are inherent in this issue, and that liberty is very important. My question, I guess, is we all know the elephant in the room is if there's nothing in the Senate, this whole thing is, pretty much, although your efforts are appreciated, for naught. The cake is baked with the IUB. We know it's a foregone conclusion. And so I guess longer term, my question is what substantive changes could be made to the Iowa Utility Board so that a 3-member unelected panel doesn't have the right to erode property rights of citizens that we're hearing from on a regular basis? And so I guess that's a longer term question, but I wonder if there's been any discussion on legislation that would take that avenue even away from the Iowa Utilities Board. I don't know if that's a discussion that's been had, or if that's something that the Senate, and I'm appreciative of your views, but that Senate leadership is simply not interested in, because I think it's eroding the confidence of Iowans in the process. So that's a question for you.
I haven't heard anything directly related to taking that responsibility away, but they do have to operate within the rules that we write. And so I do think that there should be a conversation, and maybe we can shift this conversation to exactly that. What do we need to do to rewrite the laws in regards to eminent domain to make sure that it's working correctly for Iowans, not just on this issue, but going forward? Do we need to define specifically what a public good means? Because it says it has to be for a public good. There's a lot of different people that are saying, well, this is cleaning the air. Everybody breathes air. It's a public good. Well, I don't think that was probably intended, what was intended when they passed that legislation. So maybe we need to tighten that up. Probably need to tighten up to your point about private entities. When is it allowed to be used? When is it not? So I think that we can, or the 90% threshold that we proposed and passed multiple times in the House. If we change those laws, then obviously the utility board has to operate underneath those rules. And I think that can help eliminate some of these problems in the future with future projects. So I hope that we can have that conversation. I think right now, at least with the Senate, everything is kind of a no-go because it's all perceived to be, pro-pipeline, anti-pipeline, when we should be having a conversation about what should the eminent domain laws in the state be, and how can we change them to make sure that they're working going forward.
Last week was the last presidential debate, was that correct, or was that 2 weeks ago already? I'm sorry, whatever it was.
Yeah.
But we had a presidential candidate that went on the record at that debate that the Iowa GOP and the national GOP is demanding of Republican candidates to not talk about the issue of eminent domain or carbon pipelines while caucusing in Iowa. We've kind of been able to confirm private conversations with other presidential candidates that those conversations are indeed happening. Given that all of us are conservatives in the room, other than JD, not to throw you out there, JD, but that we've got a Republican-controlled House and Senate, how do we give confidence to voters across the state that are now hearing these very real claims on the national press from candidates that the party is calling the shots, not our elected representatives? And what have you guys seen in your time in Des Moines from party leaders? I know you said, Kevin, that the Senate would not bring up that bill. What can be done to try to right the ship?
Well, I wish I had a better answer. Unfortunately, I just don't know what leverage I have in the discussion immediately. It's obviously they're gonna make a decision here in the next, coming, months, I guess, and then we're gonna find out what they decide. And I guess I expect it's probably gonna end up in a court case and it's gonna go from there. So, I think the immediate future is that, and how long that takes is anybody's guess. But I agree with you that I think hopefully we can even now this year, especially as this thing kind of drags on, we can at least have a discussion about laying better ground rules for eminent domain, how it's used, when it can be used, and when it's appropriate, what thresholds it should be. But other than that, I wish I had a better answer. That's just a tough question.
Kevin, could I ask you? Not to put Senate leadership on the spot, but if would there be the votes if the Senate leadership allowed this to come before the Senate?
I'm not sure about that. I would say, I'm just not sure. I'd say probably it would not be clear.
Okay, do you know how many Democrats there are off the top of your head, or would they be in support of curtailing?
Let's let him have the mic when he answers, so this can be, this is a very important answer.
Yeah, I guess my whole point is this not the will of the majority in the Senate, or is this a matter of Senate leadership? And I know that puts you in a little bit of a precarious spot, but is this really?
Give him 2 mics.
Yeah, the Senate. Budget cuts, we don't even have enough mics.
To be honest, I really can't answer that question. I just don't know, to be honest. So we haven't had that chance to have it, so.
Can I chime in here?
Yeah, go ahead, JD.
Okay. I think you guys are all dancing around. Ultimately, I see it's the governor's decision. She picks the IUB board. We've seen that with vouchers. We've seen that with a lot of different things. The property tax thing. She's running the ship in the state, and so that's the way the Democrats see it. Is that we could say the Senate, we can say the House, all that, but at the end of the day, if she says go, it sounds like it's going to go. And so that's where I'd put my efforts for all the activists out there who are listening, because that's where we see it, and just calling it as it is. And just so you know, Ken and I have a great relationship. I respect him a lot. And I want to say regarding property taxes, I actually agree, despite our labels are probably different, but I agree with board member Nelson.
Go ahead.
That's germane, but well, I'll just say, since Supervisor Nelson brought up the party issue, what I would say is Thomas Jefferson said he'd rather have radical freedom than peaceful slavery, and I would speak to the GOP in the House and the Senate: don't be slaves. live free. It's we the people. Stand up. Someone lead, push it through. Because the majority of the Iowans have spoken from both sides. I agree with Supervisor Nelson and JD. They don't want the pipelines. And I think, too, speaking to the IAB, we need to address that. But I'm getting tired, not from you gentlemen, but just people saying, well, it's out of our hands. We can't do anything. I would say let the parties burn to the ground. Let them burn to the ground. I'll say it publicly. Let it burn to the ground. And let's be constitutionalists. Because in the beginning, we all know what the founders said. They said, give it one generation of a two-party system, and the system will crumble. And I think we're beginning to see the crumbling and the ripples of that. And so I would say, just lead. People are looking for leadership in that. And so, live free. Don't be slaves to the parties.
It's not just the pipeline itself, it's also the mechanisms and the secrecy behind the different entities involved. And so whatever light you can shine where there's darkness would be appreciated. But as we've stated, I mean, this is a massively lopsided public opinion issue. There's, if private property rights are eroded by private enterprise, it's unforgivable on the part of those affected, and they won't care what the logic is. They'll just know deep down this is not right what's happening. Anything else to add?
I have one. Is there anything good we did this last term?
Good question.
Good question.
JD, you're up.
Hey, before I don't know how much longer we're going, but there is one thing that I would like to just bring to this, particularly to this group. I've been going to different events nationally. I went to Farm Aid, the conference part before the music part. I've been talking at different conferences, working with USDA folks. Ultimately, Sioux City and the Sioux City area in northwest Iowa is the only part of the state that doesn't have a food hub. And I feel that economically, we are losing out on millions of dollars in just any way that we can engage a farm to Sioux City on a much larger level, much more local level. That's money that's staying in the community. I feel we have a very extracted economy where a lot of money that gets bought by consumers goes out of state or out of the Siouxland area. And this is something that I'm very passionate about, and I'm willing to work with anybody and everybody on this. And I think whether it's a municipality level, whether it's county level, whether it's state level, or even federal level, I think there's layers. And I've talked with the Sioux City Food Bank on this too. And so this, again, it's a great way that we can build the rural and urban relationships stronger. And just, again, it's money that would be put back and invested back into the community. And I think, like I said, there's I've seen models it's millions of dollars that we're just leaving on the table. And so building that infrastructure, the want and the need, I've seen studies from Iowa State all across the state that it's needed, it's wanted, but the infrastructure is just not there. And so anything we can do for that, I'd be very interested in working on.
I think you've all come to these enough that you know that you don't come to hear all the great things that you're doing. But I guess I just want to say thank you for your efforts to reduce the size and scope of state government. Thank you for standing up for parents and their involvement in education. Thank you for standing up for life. And thank you for giving landowners a voice, at least in the House and maybe in the minority in the Senate, on their private property rights. So I want to say thank you for all of that, as well as the 5 of you are taking time today away from your families. And I know you're getting ready to go into session where you'll be away from your families even more. So I think that's laudable in and of itself. So just wanted to say that.
Yeah, and not to pick on, Ken, I appreciate your stance and your vote on the pipeline thing. And Kevin, you and I have talked about it many times, and I know where you're at. And Bob Henderson and I, we went down to Fort Dodge to what was the first real big pipeline meeting in the state, and we spent all day there, and there were several other representatives and senators there from across the state that were at that meeting participating, and we had a lot of great speakers and speakers from right here in Woodbury County that were there. And so, but I think like Dan said, it's a time to be courageous and brave, and I think we've got some good men sitting here that could do that. And so don't take this as a criticism as much as an encouragement that the people are behind you on this and on both sides of the aisle, and there is a right and a wrong here. So, and I think our last agenda item is a little more lighthearted than the ones that we had. You want me to segue into that, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so this last one was just one that I brought up, and we've got two clerks over here that I think would be able to speak to this as well. But as many of you know, we've got a statewide shortage when it comes to our emergency volunteers, whether they're firefighters, ambulance drivers, EMTs, whatever. I've got a brother who's a volunteer firefighter. They're always actively recruiting to try to get new people. And what's tough is there's a lot of regulation, there's a lot of training, there's a lot of classes that all go into this for obvious reasons. And I've had some volunteers approach me and say, you know, are there some benefits, some perks that maybe the state or counties or cities could come up with to try to attract folks to get into these positions? And one of the things they've offered up is maybe access to IPERS or access to state health insurance. You know, a lot of these volunteers live and work around those towns, so they're self-employed, they're farmers, they're small business owners. Health insurance is expensive, maybe not easily accessible. And so maybe if they're going to commit that kind of service to their county and to their state, that they may be able to buy in or something of the like, and use that as a recruitment perk to get these folks to volunteer. And I think another thing is you got to start young. You know, some communities have a young volunteer firefighter program. I know like Lawton is one. I think Sergeant Bluff, wildly successful, but funding for that can sometimes be tough if there's only a few students. And so maybe if there's some grants or things like that the state could do, that local fire departments could try to implement a young firefighter program, that might be something very beneficial. Those are just some ideas. So this is just a total, brainstorming session. But, as we talk about, taxpayer-funded emergency services, that sort of thing, not to take away from what Mr. Mitchell does, because I know our departments love working with them, but it's going to be a continuing problem statewide if we can't figure out how to get more volunteers in these communities to commit to putting out fires or getting in that ambulance. And so we can either try to address that now, or it'll shift onto the taxpayer eventually if we've got to just honestly have full-time departments in counties to do that. So I'll just leave it with that, and if you two want to add anything, I know Correctionville, you guys got a new ambulance a year ago, which was, well, not quite a year ago, but anyway, I just wanted to open it with that, and any ideas or thoughts you want to have, go for it.
I just want to say that exactly what you said, it's a huge problem trying to get volunteers, and it's gotten worse as the years have gone on. There used to be a lot of local businesses, and as our towns kind of get a little bit smaller, you don't have that driving force during the daytime. At night and overnight, you might have a little bit better coverage, but during the day, it is slim to none. And to lose those services, we're one of the furthest out in the county, and to lose that would just be detrimental. Terrible. We've had over 170 ambulance runs so far this year. That's the most we've ever had in the town of Correctionville, 766 people.
Are employers cooperating to the fullest to let guys and gals get out at a moment's notice?
No. Yeah, as far as I know, the employers that we have, but like she said, it's limited, who works in town now during the day.
A lot of them are commuting to other communities to work now, and I would say the employers, yes, we've got some great employers, but even the people within the town that still work, they just don't have the desire or the drive to volunteer to do that. There's no benefit for them other than, they might get off of work for a bit or something. I don't know.
And I would just say, like in Mobile, I can think of the five guys that are for sure almost in Mobile every day. One is retired, so thankful to have him always, and he's our chief currently. And then the other four are all younger guys, but 3 of them are self-employed. So when they take a call, they are not making any money. You know, I mean, and a lot of these calls can take several hours where they lose a whole, and of course, they're never at 5 o'clock, you know, they're always at 8, 9 o'clock, so then their whole day is shot. And so, you know, it's a big commitment to volunteer, and then not only to give your time and talents and your energy and your body to do this kind of stuff, but then to give your financial, to take a financial hit because of it too is I think what's chasing a lot of folks away. And so that's what we're just asking, is there something that we could do to create a perk that would maybe entice some of these folks to not only join, but then stay on? Because retention is, I think, another issue too. They get into it and they realize what the demands are, and they can't afford to do it. They physically can't do it, whatever. So anyway, just something to think about as we go into this next session.
One of the things that we did pass last year, which was a kind of a small thing, but I think it's significant, is that volunteer emergency people, particularly firefighters, can purchase tires for their vehicles on the state contract, which will save them, you know, some money, you know. Every 3 years. Yeah. One set every 3 years. That's right. Mm-hmm. That's correct. But that discussion has gone on, at least in the House, the very same thing about how to encourage volunteers. Yeah.
Scott, is there anything else? Would you like to come up here and say anything? Jeremy, could you move the mic down, because I think we'll have to.
It isn't the fact it's becoming an issue. It is an issue. It's an issue for every small town. I sit here as the Director of Emergency Services. I'm also the mayor of our small town of Hornick, and I also sit on the chair of Mike's Commission. It is a problem in the small towns, and you know, all small towns are getting smaller. You all know what average age of your small towns are. You know, the volunteers aren't there anymore, and I don't know if it's not the community dedication is like it used to be from my folks to where it's come, but it's becoming a very, very large issue in Woodbury County. And I don't know what that's going to look like in the future, but it's not looking good at this time. It's getting worse and worse. You know, your Granite Correctional is the farthest out. Here in Woodbury County, the Supervisors do fund. We provide 24-hour EMT service, and we also do our best to provide 24-hour paramedic service. We're based out of Climbing Hills, so we're about 40 miles from them. So they get a call and they can't get anybody. We're 40 miles from them. And, you know, that's what we have to work with. But the small communities it's getting worse and worse. I mean, I also belong to the fire department in Hornick, where I'm the mayor of. And, you know, our youngest mentor is Doyle's son. Granted, Doyle's in Mobile, but Doyle works in our community. You know, there's no incentive to take person the ages of Doyle's boy and make him come and join a local fire department or EMS. There's no incentive there, because you got to put in your time, you got to put in the training, and you got to put in to go to the calls. There's no incentive whatsoever for them younger people to do it. And why would they want to give up their time if there's nothing they're going to gain? I know what I gain from it, and that's me. I know why I do it, and I do it for the right reasons. But there's nothing to get the incentive of the younger people to get into it. Some communities have good luck at it, like Sergeant Bluff a lot, but a lot of other ones don't. And I don't know what that should look like, but something needs to help your small, you know, rural Iowa. You know, because that's what we were started on, is rural America, farming, you know, that's what created this country. And that's the biggest thing, is people in rural Woodbury County, that's a service it's hard. Very hard for the communities.
The question I would have is, are you asking for assistance in being able to get more volunteers, or are you asking for assistance which would replace the need for volunteers?
I think maybe both ways. I don't know what, you know, like I say, I don't have the answer, but it's something that we need to look at now, because we notice it in Woodbury County. I know other counties around our area are the same way, so it can't be any different anywhere else. It has to be getting worse and worse. So if we don't get ahead of it sometime, we're going to be behind it. Then you're going to be like parts of the country like Arizona. You know, in Arizona, and I know this to be true because I have a cousin of mine in Winters down there, if you are not a member of their association and pay their fees before they'll haul you in an ambulance, you're gonna give them $1,000. You know, is that what we want to happen in rural Iowa? I hope not. You know, I mean, case in point, March, we hauled my mother, passed away end of March, but that's life. But, you know, it was very nice to know that when the pager went off, that I knew that the people that I work with from emergency services were coming to take care of my mother. I want that for everybody in Woodbury County. And the county does a very good job of funding, so that happens. They work very hard at that. But other counties are in the same boat. They don't have emergency services like we do. It's all based on volunteers. And some of the, you know, like the bill Mike was talking about, you know, if you, and I know I may be getting a little off track here, but on that, like in Woodbury County, that would never pass to tax that to the whole county. And the reason why is because we're sitting in Sioux City. You know, the biggest population of Sioux City has fire and EMS. So maybe to add to that bill where it's just taxed in your rural, where it's not, you know, general, it's just for the rural area, so that the rural people that are gonna benefit from it are who paying for it. I mean, I hate to say this, but we all know it all comes down to money at the end. And we shouldn't take somebody's life worth anything, but that's, in the end, that's what it has to, that's what it comes down to, being able to fund it. I mean, like I said, I don't know the answer, but it's something that needs to be looked at in, now instead of later. When you've already got, you know, we've got Correctionville, and you got Anthony, you got Odo, already now that are hurting very bad in Woodbury County. And that's just off the top of my head.
I know we're coming to a wrap here, but if this could be a conduit to further dialogue, I know that you've been working with Mark. I think we want to have discussion and be people that you can reach out to help craft solutions, not just share complaints. So as you're going through this session, if you say, you know, what would House File 718 if we did X, Y, and Z look like, and have our budget analyst or county engineer, I think we want this to be a kicking off point to further dialogue as well. So we stand ready to keep that conversation going.
Thank you, Scott. Well, these are the items that, from a county oh, yeah, please, sorry.
This isn't on the agenda, but I just wondered yesterday when you caucused, local option sales tax, is that back on discussion? Do you know?
It's never really been on the table in the House. I mean, it wasn't something, it was not something that we got.
Okay. And how about the bill on publications? Do you think that'll get brought back up, or having to pay for publications?
I do think that some additional, like another attempt at something probably even a little different, maybe a little less, whatever, will probably be introduced. I mean, I think just, again, really moving more towards consistent electronic notification as a mechanism that everybody seems to think will be more effective, not necessarily to immediately get rid of, but yeah, to provide a mechanism that would satisfy that requirement, or at least, especially in areas where there aren't even good print publications. So.
Well, these are the county topics we had to kick things off, and we don't have to, you know, belabor this if you have to get going, but if there's anything else you wanted to let us know about the process or anything you're working on personally, please feel free to do so now. If there's legislation you want to compliment in the other chamber that you're going to try and emulate, or even on the other side of the aisle, things you think that are going to be worked on, it'd be good for us to know, especially as we start our budget process as well in January.
Thank you, Matthew, and thanks for having us. I'll just say real quick, and then I need to run. The number one thing that I've been hearing, I'm sure you guys have been hearing the same thing, is that there's a shortage of housing. We as a state need to do something, or we need to find some solution to incentivize developers, whether that's expanding the workforce housing tax credit or whether there's other ideas. because it's really becoming an impediment to workforce, to job growth. You know, I hear from employers all the time, you guys probably the same thing, that they have such a hard time finding employees. When they finally do, they commute, they try to find a house in Sioux City or in the area, they can't find one that they can afford. And when you have local developers that are telling me that the new minimum construction cost is $300,000, the high demand houses are between $150,000 and $250,000, so you just don't have enough supply in that range, and it's physically impossible to build more of that supply because the cheapest house you can build is $300,000. So there needs to be some way where, whether it's the state or industry or there's lots of other, you know, possibilities maybe we could entertain, but something needs to help fill that gap, because I think there's a housing shortage here. I'm sure it's probably the same in Correctionville and across western Iowa, but that's something I'll try to focus on this year.
All right, well, thank you all again. Thank you, Michelle Scaff, for running the cameras for us. I'll try and send out the link to the recording to anyone that couldn't make it. So we have some, you know, have that going for us. Any other thoughts from supervisors before we wrap this up?
Doing a good job.
Thank you.